To discipline the mind is not to bind it, but to free it. The undirected mind is like a wild horse running in every direction, exhausting itself without arriving anywhere. But with care, patience, and steady guidance, that same wild force becomes a trusted companion, carrying you with power and grace toward where you truly wish to go. We often mistake discipline for suppression. We think it means forcing ourselves into narrow cages of willpower, cutting away our desires, silencing our emotions. But real discipline is something far gentler and infinitely stronger. It is alignment. It is learning to turn the streams of thought so that they flow toward clarity rather than scattering into confusion. It is teaching the mind to listen, to see, to rest, and to act when needed without constant agitation. Consider attention. Wherever it rests, life grows. If your attention is tangled in fear, then fear blossoms. If it is bound to resentment, resentment deepens its roots. But when attention is placed in calm, in purpose, in the quiet rhythm of what matters, life takes shape with balance. The disciplined mind is not a battlefield but a garden, and attention is the gardener's hand. There is a paradox. Discipline creates freedom. A wandering mind leaves you a prisoner of every passing impulse, carried away by every distraction, every temptation, every wave of mood. But when the mind is disciplined, it gains order, and within that order is true liberation. Freedom is not the absence of structure, it is the power to act with clarity instead of compulsion. Yet discipline is not rigidity. A rigid mind becomes brittle, snapping under the weight of change. Discipline is rhythm, like music, like breathing, like the turning of the seasons. It is flexible yet steady, strong yet flowing. It learns when to be still and when to move, when to hold and when to release. And from such discipline arises a heart undisturbed. The storms of life may continue, the winds may howl, but the center remains unmoved. A disciplined mind creates the possibility of peace, not a peace dependent on circumstances, but one born within, a still flame untouched by the shifting world. To discipline your mind is to claim your life back from chaos. It is to live deliberately rather than accidentally, to walk with awareness rather than stumble blindly. It is not about perfection, but presence. And in that presence, you discover the greatest gift, that the mind, once disciplined, becomes not your master, but your friend. The mind is both master and servant, and this is perhaps the greatest paradox within us. Left undisciplined, it becomes a restless ruler, dictating every thought, emotion, and action without pause, leading us into cycles of worry, fear, and distraction. But when trained with care and understanding, the mind reveals itself as a faithful servant, guiding us with clarity, focus, and strength. It is not the world outside that enslaves us most often, but the world within the endless chatter, the echo of past regrets, and the anxieties of what is yet to come. When the mind takes the role of master, it does not always rule with kindness. It pushes and pulls, tossing us from one emotion to another. We become prisoners of our own thoughts, believing them to be unshakable truths rather than fleeting patterns. An undisciplined mind magnifies problems, invents fears, and keeps us chained to illusions. It tells us we cannot when we can. It tells us to fear when courage is possible. It convinces us that we are small when in fact we are vast. To be mastered by the mind is to live in constant reaction, never choosing but always being pulled. Yet there is another side to this mystery. When the mind becomes a servant, it is astonishingly powerful. Trained attention allows us to see clearly. A disciplined imagination builds bridges before they exist. A steady focus allows us to persist where others falter. When the mind is in service, it obeys the deeper self, the essence that knows what truly matters beyond impulse and fear. In that alignment, thought becomes an instrument rather than a dictator. It sharpens action, nurtures creativity, and provides the inner silence from which wisdom arises. The shift between master and servant is not accomplished through force, but through awareness. To watch the mind is to begin to guide it. In moments of stillness, we recognize its constant weaving of stories. We see how it fabricates entire worlds, how it drags us from memory to anticipation, from desire to dread, and in that seeing, something loosens. We realize that we are not the storm of thoughts but the sky in which they move. The mind then begins to soften its grip, transforming from a tyrant into a companion. Like fire, the mind can burn wildly and consume, or it can be tended carefully to warm and illuminate. Left unguarded, it rages without direction. Nurtured with discipline, it becomes the flame of clarity. When the mind serves, life becomes lighter, more deliberate. Each moment carries depth rather than confusion. Discipline does not destroy freedom. It makes freedom possible. For only when the mind serves rather than enslaves can we truly choose how to live. Discipline is not suppression but alignment, and this distinction changes everything about how we live with our own minds. Too often, people confuse discipline with force, as though it were about crushing desires, silencing emotions, or locking away thoughts that do not fit an ideal. But suppression only buries what is alive, and whatever is buried continues to move in the shadows, surfacing in distorted ways. True discipline is not about strangling the natural flow of the mind or body. It is about guiding it, harmonizing it, bringing it into rhythm with what is essential. Imagine a river. If you try to block it, it overflows or carves another path, sometimes with destructive force. Suppression works the same way. It attempts to dam the current of thought and emotion, but eventually what is denied finds a way to return, often more powerfully than before. Alignment, however, is like shaping the banks of the river so it flows with strength and clarity. You do not deny its nature, you direct it so that its force nourishes rather than destroys. Discipline works in this way. It does not demand that the mind stop moving, but rather that it learns to flow in harmony with your deeper purpose. When discipline is seen as suppression, it breeds conflict within. A part of you fights against another part, and this inner battle never ends. You may silence a thought for a moment, but the effort required leaves you weary, and the thought returns stronger. Alignment dissolves this struggle. It recognizes that every thought, every impulse, every desire carries energy, and that energy can be guided rather than crushed. To align the mind is to listen to it, to understand its patterns, and to patiently train it to serve clarity instead of chaos. Alignment also allows discipline to be sustainable. Suppression eventually collapses under its own weight because no one can live forever in resistance to themselves. Alignment, by contrast, feels natural, like tuning an instrument until it resonates in harmony. The mind learns where to rest its attention, not through force but through steady practice, until stillness and focus become second nature. What once felt like effort becomes rhythm. What once felt like control becomes freedom. This is why true discipline brings peace rather than tension. It does not mean cutting away from life, but living more fully in it. It allows the mind to be sharp without being harsh, present without being rigid. Discipline in the sense of alignment is the art of directing without suffocating, of guiding without chaining. It is the way of balance, where freedom and structure coexist. To understand discipline in this light is to see it not as a cage, but as a path. It is not the act of forcing the self into silence, but of teaching the self to sing in tune with its deepest nature. It is alignment with purpose, and from that alignment, strength, clarity, and peace arise naturally. Attention is the sharpest tool, sharper than any blade forged by human hands, for it carves reality itself. Wherever attention rests, life takes form. It is not merely a passive act of noticing. It is a force that shapes the quality of each moment and, over time, the entire direction of a life. Many underestimate its power, letting it scatter like seeds thrown to the wind, but those who learn to steady it discover that attention is the hidden craftsman of destiny. Think for a moment about how attention transforms even the simplest act. A meal eaten without attention is just routine, But when awareness rests fully on the flavors, the textures, and the nourishment, that same meal becomes rich and alive. A conversation where attention drifts becomes shallow, but when it is offered with presence, words carry depth and connection. It is not the circumstances that change, but the focus of the mind. This is the silent power of attention. It elevates the ordinary into the extraordinary. Yet, attention is also easily swayed. Left untrained, it darts from one thing to another, restless and impatient, leaving us scattered. It magnifies problems, obsesses over fears, and lingers on regrets. In this way, attention sharpens what we do not wish to carry, making burdens heavier than they need to be. The untrained edge of attention cuts without skill, wounding rather than creating. To recognize this is the first step in learning its discipline. We become what we give our attention to. The sharpness of attention is not only in its focus, but in its ability to cut through illusion. When turned inward, it reveals the restless patterns of thought and emotion that often control us unnoticed. With steady observation, attention exposes the tricks of the mind, showing how quickly it fabricates entire stories from a fleeting thought. This kind of attention is like light in a dark room. It does not need to fight the shadows. It simply reveals them, and in that revelation, the shadows lose their hold. To refine attention is to train the mind as one would sharpen a blade. It requires patience, consistency, and care. At first, it trembles and slips away, but each time it is gently returned, it grows stronger. With practice, attention becomes unwavering, capable of resting fully on what matters, cutting away distraction, and holding steady even in the face of turmoil. Such attention is not rigid but alive, alert yet relaxed, precise yet open. When attention is honed, it becomes the foundation for clarity and peace. It directs energy where it is needed most. It reveals beauty hidden in plain sight, and it guards against the chaos of a wandering mind. More than memory, more than knowledge, it is attention that allows one to live fully. A life guided by clear attention is not scattered but whole, not shallow but deep. It is the sharpest tool because it shapes not only what we see, but how we live. Freedom comes through order, though at first it seems like a contradiction. Many imagine freedom as the absence of rules, the ability to move without restriction, to live without boundaries. Yet what appears to be freedom often becomes its opposite, for without order the mind is tossed about by every passing impulse, every fleeting desire, every sudden fear. Such a life is not freedom but captivity, bound by chaos. True freedom is not found in the absence of structure, but in the presence of inner order, for only then can one act with clarity rather than compulsion. Consider the musician who appears to play with effortless freedom, fingers dancing across the strings or keys as though guided by pure inspiration. That freedom is not the product of randomness. It comes from years of discipline, practice, and the patient cultivation of skill. Because the musician has built order into their craft, they can express themselves without hesitation. Without that order, there would only be noise, not music. In the same way, the mind must be brought into order before it can move with true liberty. When the mind is disorderly, freedom is impossible. A person may think they are choosing, but in reality, they are being driven by forces they do not see. Habits formed long ago, reactions to fear, desires planted by circumstance. Every choice becomes clouded, every action reactive. The illusion of freedom is there, but beneath it lies slavery to impulse. Order, however, brings light to these hidden chains. By arranging the mind, by bringing discipline to thought and attention, one sees clearly. And when one sees clearly, one chooses freely. Order does not mean rigidity. It is not about creating a prison of rules for the self. Order is more like a dance, a rhythm that gives space for movement while preventing collapse into chaos. Think of the planets moving through space. Their orbits are ordered precise, and because of this order, they move with harmony and balance. Without order, there would be collision and destruction. So it is with the inner life. When thought and emotion find their place, when attention is steady, the self moves freely without constant collision and confusion. There is a quiet strength in order. It allows one to meet the uncertainties of life without being broken by them. A disordered mind is thrown off balance by every change, but an ordered one adapts without losing its center. This balance creates the ground upon which freedom grows. It is not the freedom to escape life, but the freedom to meet life fully, to respond rather than react, to choose rather than be dragged. Freedom comes through order because only order makes it possible to live with intention. It does not stifle spontaneity, but makes true spontaneity possible. Without order, action is chaos disguised as freedom. With order, action becomes expression rooted in clarity. It is in this harmony that freedom is born, not the freedom of endless wandering, but the freedom of moving deliberately, with purpose and with peace. The disciplined mind creates the undisturbed heart, for the state of the heart is deeply tied to the movement of the mind. When thoughts are scattered, restless, and uncontrolled, the heart cannot remain calm. It mirrors the turbulence of the mind, fluttering with anxiety, tightening with fear, or burning with anger. But when the mind is steady, trained to rest in clarity rather than chaos, the heart settles into peace. The storms of thought may still come and go, but they no longer shake the foundation within. An undisciplined mind is like a wild wind, sweeping everything into its path. It invents worries that do not exist, replays memories that cannot be changed, and magnifies small concerns until they seem overwhelming. The heart, bound to this constant noise, knows no rest. It races, it aches, it grows heavy under the weight of thoughts that are never still. People often believe their suffering comes from the world outside, but more often it is the disordered mind that disturbs the heart. Without discipline, even moments of peace are fragile, easily broken by the next passing thought. When discipline enters, the relationship changes. A disciplined mind is not one that suppresses thought, but one that understands it. It knows when to focus and when to release, when to act and when to remain still. This balance creates space for the heart to breathe. With fewer storms within, the heart begins to rest naturally, no longer shaken by every ripple of thought. The disciplined mind becomes a guardian, keeping the heart free from unnecessary disturbance. This harmony is not forced but cultivated. Through practice and awareness, the mind learns not to chase every impulse, not to cling to every passing desire or fear. It develops patience, and in that patience, the heart grows steady. Imagine a lake on a calm day. When the winds are quiet, the water reflects the sky with perfect clarity. In the same way, when the mind is calm, the heart reflects peace. Discipline is the quieting of those winds, not by stopping them entirely, but by keeping them from becoming storms. The undisturbed heart is not an escape from life's challenges. Difficulties will still arise, losses will still be felt, uncertainty will still come. But with a disciplined mind, the heart does not collapse under their weight. It feels fully yet remains steady, experiencing sorrow without being consumed by it, meeting joy without clinging desperately to it. This balance allows one to live with depth, meeting life as it is, without being enslaved by every change of circumstance. The disciplined mind creates the undisturbed heart because order in thought leads to peace in being. It is not about control but about clarity, not about force but about harmony, and when the heart is undisturbed, it becomes the source of true strength. In that stillness, one discovers resilience, patience, and a profound sense of freedom that no external storm can take away.